Welcome
Lead balloons.
Lead balloons.
The alchemy of
The
unpopular
alchemy
opinions.
of unpopular opinions.
Yeah, I feel a little spicy today, so all bets are off.
And I know that you're out to get the ladies.
We're not encouraged to think critically.
Life is hard. It's supposed to be hard.
Oh my gosh. That's hilarious. Busted.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Trent, we're going to be talking about some of your favorite books today.
Man, I'm excited. Do not get me started / get me started.
It's going to happen. Starting and getting are two verbs that will be used regularly in this episode. So, okay. So guys, in our this is our second installment of our favorite books series. Trent, you talked to me last week about one of my favorite books, The Four Agreements, which is, it's a pretty short book that you can read like in a day. On the other hand, Trent, your favorite books, The Lord of the Rings, 3 novels totaling over 1,000 pages, which includes like the prologues and the appendices and all like the glossaries and the weird language shit that Tolkien loves. These are like two sides of the spectrum. So, like, what do you have to say for yourself?
Not much, man. I think I got involved with it before I realized how long it was. I remember reading The Hobbit in 6th grade. I don't know if we read it as in class, like as an assignment. I'd read it in 6th grade. And then the summer between 6th and 7th grade, my family for a while, we were staying with my grandparents, and there was just not much to do. So, not surprisingly, there wasn't a whole lot of entertainment no Nintendo or anything at their place. So I picked up The Fellowship of the Ring that summer, and I think I read that book, or I read it within a few days. I think I read like 80% of it in one day, just went after it. And I was a fast reader back then because I didn't have to worry about like assignments and figuring out what the imagery was. I just read for entertainment, and I loved the shit out of that. And so then read then 7th grade rolls around. I read Two Towers and Return of the King in a pretty fairly quickly. So it didn't really occur to me how long it was, but yes, very long books. And if a book's going to hold your attention, if a long book like that's going to be able to hold your attention, it better be a damn good book. So it is a good book.
2 questions. How many times have you read through these books?
Yeah, I was thinking about that just now. Probably about 5 to 6 minimum, easily 5 to 6. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think after the movies came out starting in I think 2001, I read them shortly after that. I read the book after that. And then didn't touch it again for years. And then starting in like 2010, I think over 3 or 4 years, I read it every single year. And it's been a number of years since I've read it all the way through. But I'm pretty regularly referring to it, opening it up, for a short period of time. So, yeah.
Amazing. Second question. How old were you when you read that all in like one day, Fellowship of the Ring in one day?
Yeah, I was probably 12 years old.
Oh,
yeah, 12 years old.
That's unbelievable and a little gross.
Yeah, it was wild.
I have only read The Hobbit all the way through. I think I read most of the Fellowship of the Ring, but I've seen the movies many, many, many times. But I am highly impressed by your capacity to read books in such a fast manner. So before we dive into like the deeper content, the Helm's Deep, if you will. Let's dive into some of our favorite like characters, and this could be movie / books. You got to give me a little bit of movie like leeway, okay?
Yes. Okay.
You start. Give me a favorite line.
Favorite line? Well, okay. So, man, I probably have a dozen. This is hard to choose, but this is spoken by Eowyn. Remember, she's featured in the films, and obviously, there's a lot of stuff from the books that doesn't make it in the film. But And this is one of the, like, you don't see the courtship between her and Faramir, and so they're
Oh
having
yeah,
this. He's
yep.
courting her, and she's kind of butthurt because she liked Aragorn and realized it's never going to happen, right? So anyway, he's finally kind of made his move and feels like he's making some headway with her, and she says this: "Then must I leave my own people, man of Gondor?" she said. "And would you have your proud folk say of you, 'There goes a lord who tamed a wild shield maiden of the north'? Was there no woman of the race of Numenor to choose?" I just love that. There goes a lord who tamed a wild. Is that what you want? There goes a lord who tamed a wild shield maiden of the north. Yes. Yes, that's what I'd like to hear.
Yeah, that's pretty
I just
bold.
love that. It's cheeky. It's good. All right.
I'm
What
gonna
about
go
yourself?
with some humor. I mean, I feel like the movies do a good job of capturing some of the humor.
Yeah.
Especially, I love the line from Pippin when they're first going off after the ring they found
Yeah.
Aragorn, and he's like, "What about breakfast? And you already had breakfast, yes, one breakfast, but what about second breakfast?" And
And then Mary goes, "I don't think he knows about that one, Pip."
He's like 11 seas and all these, and I did a little research on
Yeah.
this. I guess that line didn't precisely exist in the books, but
Yeah.
I mean, Tolkien obviously did so much culture and building around all these different races. So second breakfast was definitely mentioned multiple times in the book. So I think the movies did a good job of capturing some of that culture building and some really funny lines. Okay, give me a favorite character.
Wow, yeah, this one's tough too. I have multiple, but I'm gonna land on Faramir. I like Faramir as
All right,
a
for people who haven't read the
yes.
books and only seen the movies, remind them who Faramir is.
Well, Faramir is in the movies. He appears in the second and third movies, but okay, so Boromir, who appears in the first movie, who is sent from Gondor to represent Gondor and becomes part of the Nine, who are the Fellowship of the Ring. His younger brother is Faramir. And Faramir meets Merry and Pippin in the Two Towers. And Faramir is kind of a counterpoint to a contrast, if you will, to Boromir. They're very close. But whereas Boromir is very kind of stern and aggressive and warlike and kind of unyielding, Faramir is also a brave and very competent warrior, but he's not given as much to warlike things. He's kind of a reluctant hero, a reluctant warrior, maybe a little bit more restrained, less impulsive. They capture Gollum, and he shows a lot of restraint and wisdom in the handling of Gollum that maybe you suspect that Boromir would not have. The other thing too is Boromir gives in to the ring.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating in the books is that Faramir doesn't even really seem to be that tempted by the rings. So he's quite a contrast to Boromir. But anyway, I love the just to illustrate what I like about him, I'll do that by way of a quote of his. He says, "I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend." I just absolutely love that. It's a guy
That's
who
such a great
you
line.
would not mess with this guy. He would destroy you. But he's not. And another thing that he says, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, we do not kill any living thing unless we need to, and even then we don't do that with delight.
Yeah.
Doesn't take delight in killing. So I really like Faramir. Yeah. Yourself.
Oh, I have to go with Gandalf.
Gandalf.
I'm a sucker for the sage in any book, like the Yodas, the Dumbledores. I'm a sucker for the sage. I think there's something in me that just really longs to see that develop in myself. And Gandalf, almost like he's out of time. He's a timeless being. And I actually looked up, how old was Gandalf? And, because there's a line in the movies that he's walked the ages of men, how many generations of men, and I think what I saw was something along the lines of 400 plus years. We have no idea, maybe 1,000. We don't really know, but basically the same ages of Sauron and Saruman, these ageless creatures. But what I love about Gandalf is his the tenderness he shows towards hobbits, his the wisdom and the fierceness that he offers, his battle with the Balrog, is that what they're called?
The Balrog, yeah.
Yep. And just coming out as being almost like reincarnated as Gandalf the White, and just his journey of wisdom is what it, and his is like a wisdom warrior of sorts. Like you see like these samurai that are super disciplined, fantastic warriors, but almost more philosophical in nature.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I love about Gandalf. What do you think of Gandalf? I'm just curious.
Can I do a quick Gandalf quote when he's addressing Wormtongue? He says, I did not travel through fire and death to bandy crooked words with a witless worm." I mean, if that's not a line that you don't want to use tomorrow, then, I don't know what to say about you. That's such a great line.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a fantastic line. Yeah. I actually, in preparation for this podcast, me and my now wife, Poonam, we just got married, and we watched all the Lord of the Rings and just went through all the movies.
It's great.
She had to get tired of me. I just multiple times in the movie would just stop and just add commentary of like, look at the cinematography, or listen to the soundtrack, or did you know, like on the behind the scenes they talk about how they created the scene, and I'm just like, listen to the character, the dialogue. I mean, it's just so rich and so beautiful. Okay, so I want you to give the people a bit of your passion by talking a little bit about Tolkien's vision for this trilogy. And coming from your literature background, help us understand Tolkien's dislike for allegory. I'll throw a little quote for people. You told me about this quote coming from the prologue of which book?
Yeah. It's actually the foreword to the second edition, but it's printed like the copy. Well, the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings, the copy I have, it has all three. Yeah, the trilogy.
Okay,
I think that's a fault. So I think we've, just as quick thing, we've called it a trilogy. It actually has 6 books, but it is one story, which is the Lord of the Rings. So anyway, in the foreword to the second edition of the Lord of the Rings where you get the quotation that you're about to give me, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. So Tolkien says, as for any inner meaning or message, it has in the intention of the author none. It is neither allegorical nor topical. As the story grew, it put down roots into the past and threw out unexpected branches. So tell us about Tolkien's vision and this dislike of allegory.
Yeah, so first kind of about his vision. So Lord of the Rings, I think that, the ideas for it go way, way back for him. But I think that the writing process happened over a long period of time. I remember I think it was like between 1936 and 1949 was when most of the writing happened. Yeah. And I'm sure that he talks about rewrites and getting caught up, and like he's talks about, being in the mines of Moria, and then he stops there for years and then picks it up again. And he had written about the hobbits, and then people had asked for more stories about hobbits, and and then he also says this in the foreword, just his own words. He says I am paraphrasing here, but he says he wanted to try his hand at a long tale that would amuse, delight, and potentially move people. It was a work many years in the making. So it was kind of like, hey, let's see if I can write a very long story that people are actually going to enjoy. He has a background. He was fascinated with languages. He was known as a philologist, which is, roughly speaking, somebody who studies language or literary texts and linguistics and etymology, where words come from. He was just absorbed and enamored with language, which is so evident from the stories. I mean, you see poems in Elvish and references to Elvish language, and you can see in the attention to detail and the genealogies, the naming of places and people. He's very obsessed with that. He is he was a professor of I think literature, but also I think studied medieval literature and these kinds of things, and he was well versed in Norse mythology and different mythologies, Greek mythology. And I think he was well versed in Greek. So anyway, that kind of gives you a background for him. And then related to this question of allegory, and you and I think we can expand on this in this conversation, because you and I have talked about this before, but he like he says, he talks about his dislike for allegory. Now, if you're not aware, for those listening, if you're not maybe as aware with the term allegory basically refers to like a story where characters and places almost kind of have a one-to-one correspondence with like a character trait or something. So like the classic true like seminal allegory in my view is Pilgrim's Progress. You actually have characters named like Patience and Charity and all these kinds of things. Like the character represents a single virtue. So the story is sort of very easily decodable, right? There's like there might be a Christ figure or a devil figure or a character who represents sin. Whereas a story like a historical fiction or fantasy story, there might be some connection, some touch points, but there's not going to be like a character. Like, for instance, there might be some overlap, some resonance between like Gandalf and Christ, but there's going to be a lot of that would be one of the few touch points. There'd be certain touch points. There'd be a lot of other ways in which these not that, and certainly Tolkien would disavow the notion that he was trying to create Gandalf as a Christ figure. But he says that he prefers, instead of allegory, he prefers history, and he says whether true or feigned, with all its varied applicability. He says the difference between applicability and allegory, the one resides in the freedom of the reader, that is the applicability, the other in the purpose domination of the author. So I think he didn't like allegory because he felt like that the author in an allegory is trying to dominate the reader and force them to see things in a certain way, rather than, obviously an author has control over the story. But I think when Tolkien says the story grew and it put down roots, there's a sense in which, and probably anybody who's written fiction, it's been a long time since I've written fiction. I have written quite a bit of poetry. And even with that little bit, you have the sense that when you're writing something, the story takes on a life of its own, and you have to sort of, or you don't have to, but it's maybe a good thing to respect the evolution of that story and to let it go in places that maybe you had not intended. And I think Tolkien is contrasting that process with an allegory where you've got this idea of what you want to accomplish with your audience, and then you find a story that's going to accomplish that thing. And he really did not like that. I think what he wanted, and what I've really appreciated about Lord of the Rings, is as I'm reading the story, and every time I read it, it's a little bit different. There are things that really reach me in a deep and powerful way that I can't predict, and move me in ways that, and I sense that the author's not necessarily trying to do that, but the way the character is written, the situation is put together, it really moves me in a very powerful way. That's what I've loved about it. What's your, because we've talked a little bit about like how he and C.S. Lewis had some conflict because Tolkien was critical of him when he wrote Chronicles of Narnia. Tolkien didn't like that it felt too allegorical. You really like Chronicles of Narnia, I think, to this day. I know that I still do as well, but probably less so now than I used to, because I do see their allegorical character, and maybe Tolkien has indoctrinated me against it.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I'm a huge C.S. Lewis fan. Maybe a little less these days than I have been over the past 20 years of my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I could easily pick Chronicles of Narnia as one of mine. For maybe 10 years, I made sure to read through all of those every year. But for me, I remember listening to a lecture series, and someone was talking about Tolkien complaining to Lewis. So, like, Lewis found Tolkien as a friend in academia and invited Lewis to be a part of this small group that Tolkien had. They called themselves the Cold Beaters, the Cold Biters, where they would read Old Norse mythology. And in order to even be a part of the group, you had to be able to read them in the original language, which was like Dead North language, right? I mean, what a bunch of snobs, language snobs, right? So Lewis had to like learn this old Norse like language in order to even be a part of the group that Tolkien started. And so Lewis joins, they become friends, and this is like the precursors of what is later called the Inklings. And I remember hearing a story of Lewis. He would share these children's books he's writing with the group, Chronicles of Narnia. And there's a part of it that's fantasy that I think Tolkien was a fan of. But what he didn't like was the very clear allegorical nature of Aslan, which was a very clear Christ figure. And then the mixture of stories, like in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Father Christmas shows up. And Tolkien hated that. It's like you're mixing like histories here. And so I do know that there was a very deep commitment like for Tolkien, a deep commitment to keep a clean story that you create as an author. And so I know that for I still love Lewis's stories, Chronicles of Narnia, but they're nowhere near the depth and richness of Lord of the Rings, where my understanding is Tolkien spent years just on creating languages and maps before even a story began. So that's a totally different world.
Jeez.
Secondly, what about these books resonates with your propensity for good literature?
Yeah, well, I'll say a few things here. So, I think that the books have such great elegance and great subtlety of expression. And one way to illustrate that, and yet not stuffy. I don't think you'd come away from Lord of the Rings thinking it's stuffy. Not at all. But the care with which he creates characters and expresses them through their use of language, I think, is wonderful. This is a small example, but Aragorn says when he's meeting the hobbits for the first time after Frodo has just disappeared. They're in that pub and things are getting out of hand. Anyway, Frodo puts the ring on, he disappears, and then Aragorn finds him and he says, "I can avoid being seen if I wish, but to disappear entirely, that is a rare gift indeed." I mean, there's so many other ways you could express what he's trying to express there. You could just say like, "Oh, I'm good at, I'm good at, not being seen,
I'm good at hiding, but you went invisible."
Yeah, I mean, can you think about how that moment could have been botched? It could have been botched, but the way that I can avoid being seen if I wish, but to disappear entirely, that is a rare gift indeed. There's an elegance, a rhythm to the language that I find very winsome there. I think also, Joel, is the man, especially remember when we were younger. I don't know, my experience. I mean, I think my imagination is still very verdant and capacious, but I think that when I was younger, I just had these worlds that I could live in, and Lord of the Rings it created a world that you just wanted to explore. But the other thing that's great about it is he leaves so many stones unturned, and so many, he gives you little seedlings for stories that I want to know more about Gandalf's origin, or what were the hobbits like, 1,000 years ago, or what could have happened with Gollum, and what is in the Grey Havens, what's out there, all
what
these
is
kinds
the
of things.
Undying Lands,
yeah, there's a million stories that could have been to the Undying Lands, million stories that could have been told. A character that doesn't appear in the movies is Tom Bombadil. I don't know if you remember him from any of your readings, but Tom Bombadil is like, again, this ancient, not a wizard, but this ancient character that the hobbits meet when they're leaving and going before they get to Bree. To the end of the Prancing Pony, but in the books, they're leaving the Shire and all this stuff, and they encounter this character named Tom Bombadil, and Tom Bombadil is like as old as Middle Earth, and he's sort of this cheerful character who's kind of running around, really odd. But then they discover he's extremely powerful. And one of the ways you see that is Frodo puts on the ring and Tom can still see him. And he's like, give me, quit playing jokes with old Tom Bombadil. Give me that ring. And he takes the ring and just kind of flips it up in the air carelessly. And then when they get to the Council of Elrond, they're like asking, what about, could Tom Bombadil help us and all this kind of stuff? They're like, oh, Tom, Tom's super powerful, but eventually Sauron will probably get to him. But Tom he doesn't care about these things. He's more into what he's doing. It's just like, wait, what? Who is this guy? It's just I just love that about these stories, how they get you going down these trails. They don't finish it for you, and that means that you get to kind of do the work. And anybody who's like great at writing stories and teasing the imagination does that. They sort of know when to cut it off for you, and I just absolutely love that. There's so many more things I could say, but those are a couple things: the quality and elegance of language, and the world making power of Tolkien.
Yeah, the world making power is a good way to say that. I want to dive into kind of the marrow of the bone here and talk more about the hobbits in the Shire. One of my favorite themes. I can still just hear the music. Da 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 da. Like, oh, they captured it so well. Like when that starts happening after like the prologue of the first movie, and you get into the Shire, and they're filming in New Zealand, and you hear the music, and I'm just like, I'm there. And it's this imagery of, for me, like this idyllic community of beings that are jolly, frolicky, carefree. I use the word innocent. I think you might take umbrage with that, but life refuses to allow them to stay where they are. That's kind of one of the themes.
Yeah.
And I remember reading, I used this in a sermon years ago when I was talking about our spiritual evolution, and I referenced one of the songs that Bilbo wrote called A Walking Song. And there's a scene, I believe it's from Fellowship, where I think it's Sam and Pippin and Frodo, and they're walking and they're singing Bilbo's song, and it goes, still around the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate, and though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way and take the hidden paths that run towards the moon or towards the sun. And fast forward multiple years later, after the ring has been thrown into Mount Doom, and Sam overhears Frodo as they are on their journey for Frodo to go to the Undying Lands, and he adds a shift to the song, a walking song. Still around the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate, and though I have oft passed it by, a day will come at last when I shall take the hidden paths that run west of the moon and east of the sun. And just a subtle shift of I've passed it by so many times. It's like, though I've often passed it by, this day's gonna come. And I'm just wondering what we can glean, from all this. How do you see the role of the hobbits in the Shire in the Lord of the Rings?
There's a place, I think, both in the movie and in the book, where Gandalf talks about sort of the innocence that the hobbits don't know what's going out in the wider world. They don't care. Yeah. They don't know that the rangers of the north are patrolling and, in a sense, keeping them safe. The Gandalf's keeping them safe, and it makes him feel good that they live there in that place. So I think they function as sort of a.
Would you prefer the word naive rather than?
I think, but in this sense, a repository of innocence, in the sense that naivety, and that they don't know what's going on in the wider world. But I think also, and I want to talk just a little bit more too about. Let's pin the innocence thing, because I want to say something about, but also the way they function. I think is, they have a pastoral way of life, a simple way of life, and we can imagine maybe some parallels to people or places or times in our lives that would parallel sort of the experience of the hobbits. But that way of life is threatened, and though they don't know if they have the strength to do it, to go on this quest, the four hobbits, they don't know if they have the strength to do it. They have a certain set of values that compels them to do that. They have Sam especially, and Merry and Pippin also, their loyalty to each other. Sam's loyalty to Frodo, their love of good things, which Tolkien talks about in the prologue or in the foreword. It's in the prologue because he's got that section concerning hobbits, where he says that they've been willing to suffer deprivation because they love their simple life. They love a good smoke. They love all their meals. They love getting together and giving gifts and these kinds of things. So they have a way of life that they're committed to, and they don't really know how to fight and all these kinds of, but those hobbits just say, fuck it, we're going. We don't know what danger awaits us, but we're going. That's one of my favorite characters. I was about to mention Frodo. He was one of my favorite characters because I love, he's got that, he's a hobbit, but he's a little bit non-hobbity too, because he's kind of got that wisdom and that savvy. And he's like, I don't know the way, but I'll go anyway. And I love that. I love that sort of, man, because we have that moment in our lives where like, man, I don't know if I can do this, but I feel like I have to try it, and when you take those moments in life, it's such a good feeling. And if you don't die, it's a good feeling. But that's, I love that. I definitely love that.
Strong qualification there.
Yeah. Okay. So, but can I say something about the innocence thing, Joel?
Yeah, go for it.
So I would say they function, the hobbits as a community function as sort of this innocent enclave, right? That's not aware of the wider world. But I think an interesting question would be, to what extent, and this, I don't know that the book can answer this question. It's a question more for our lives as well. To what extent are the hobbits, they've become aware of the wider world? Like they talk about some hobbits going to Bree, and there are some hobbits sort of venture out, right? Merry, I think, was one of those who ventured out a little bit more. They talk about hobbits who ventured out, so they become aware of things. But I think there's this self-conscious rejection of the rest of the world, a preference for their own culture, a preference for their own way of doing things, that's insistent with them. So it's like a self-chosen innocence in a way. It's not like, well, we don't know, we couldn't know. It's like, we do know. We know some things. We know enough to know that we love our way of life even more. And I really like that stubbornness about their innocence, if you will. I think
like
that's a challenging question. Within the larger discussion about culture and stuff in our world is, are people innocent and rustic just sort of accidentally, or is it they've chosen that way because they think it's better? I don't know.
I guess that depends on exposure. I think of like old school Amish people. We know what zippers are, but we're sticking with our buttons.
That's right. I think the Amish, that's a very interesting a parallel for sure. They're very well aware of what's going on in other places,
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Here, I want to kind of dive in a little bit about the difference between the movies and the books. I've heard you say several things about it, and I find this interesting because I haven't read all of the books and am not aware of all those differences. I find it interesting because movies, they can't capture all of it. I know very well the differences between the Harry Potter books and the Harry Potter movies. I know what they cut out, what characters they cut out, and they're making decisions, some of which I think make sense, and some of which I'm like, that fucking sucks that they did that. But there's a tweet I ran across. I'm just going to go ahead and read it. And it says, I think you can learn everything you need to know about J.R.R. Tolkien from the fact that 90% of the movie version of the Battle of Helm's Deep was invented by the filmmakers. But the "What's Tater's Precious" scene was lifted from the book verbatim. So it's just like these books aren't filled with all the violence and the epicness that we think of when we look at the movies. But when you get like this obscure, odd conversation, "What's Tater's Precious?" Like that's like authentic to the T, right? So first, what are your thoughts about that tweet? And second, can you give us some more examples of where the movies depart from the books?
I don't know that I have much to add to the tweet. I think it's funny, but yeah, like that's right. I mean, Helm's Deep, that their arrival at Helm's Deep, to the from that point until like basically they're done fighting. I don't know. Does that take up like an hour of the movie?
Yeah.
And in the books, it's like one chapter.
Yeah.
It's not long at all. And so that tells you, I mean, that tells you some things about what it's like to make a movie. People ask me, what was your favorite of the three in the trilogy? And I say Fellowship of the Ring. And one of the reasons is it doesn't have any giant battles. It has some sequence. It has some skirmishes. And I find those very accessible, very easy to stay with. And wonderful. Helm's Deep started to bore me. It's like, okay, yes, CGI. Yes, I've seen this before. I've seen Braveheart. I've seen Gladiator. Yes, I've seen these big battles. It just doesn't
Even
do
Return
much
of the
for
King.
me.
Yeah.
Yes, it just went on and on. I'm like, this does not do anything for me. So, not that Tolkien did not write about battle scenes effectively, but there was just so much more going on in the books than just the battle scenes. And actually, this is something that anybody who's read through the books can laugh about too. Is, I mean, half of the books is a description of the topography,
Yep.
the landscapes, the herbs. You know, it gets pretty meticulous with those things.
Yeah.
But
Did you see the Hobbit? Did you see the Hobbit movies?
I saw the first one and maybe some of the second. I did not see the third, but they did not do it for me at all.
I hated them, and that's the only book I've read. I mean, they made 3 movies out of a book that was a third the size of The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, right.
And they just stretched it out to, I mean, other than like the Dwarvish song at the beginning, everything else was just pure filmmaking additions, like entire characters and that were just like tropes, just pure tropes. And I'm just like, where I wanted Bilbo to say, "I'm Bilbo the Barrel Rider." That was my favorite part of the book, and it didn't even show up. And I was just like, "What's happening?"
So the it sounds like you watched some of the behind the scenes little featurettes, and I watched some of those too. The script, I think, was written. I think it was co-written mostly by Philippa Boyens and Fran. I think it was Peter Jackson's wife and some other lady. I forget that Fran Walsh, maybe Philippa Boyens. I'm sure I've got one of those wrong, if not both. But anyway, it was written by them. Now, some of these scenes are verbatim from the book.
Yep.
Some of the lines are verbatim. Now, another thing that's very interesting too is that they will take lines from the book, let's say a line spoken by Aragorn, and put it in the mouth of Wormtongue. Or, you know, remember at the beginning of the movie, I think the very first line of the movie is Galadriel saying, "I can feel it in the air. I can feel it in the water. Yeah. The world is changing." That's actually from Treebeard. That's a Treebeard line that's taken verbatim from Treebeard and put in the mouth of Galadriel. It works perfectly. It's beautiful, I think. It wouldn't have worked in the movie to put it in Treebeard's mouth, but that was from Treebeard for sure. The other thing, another thing to say about the differences, and I felt like the movies did a great job. We're disappointed. A lot of people, why didn't I see Tom Bombadil and these kinds of things? And why didn't they do more with these certain characters? Whatever. You can't please everybody, and you can't include everything. Otherwise, it becomes a 15-hour, 20-hour movie.
And I've seen the extended editions. Have you seen those?
Yes,
Whew.
Yes.
You better get ready. Get ready.
That's a square meal
for a while.
Yeah. That's a square meal. But okay, so a couple things to mention. In the books, I believe that Aragorn is described as being really more sure of himself. I mean, I think Viggo Mortensen playing Aragorn did a good job, but I think that kind of throughout the movie, you kind of get the sense like he's a little bit sort of, hesitant or defers to other people in other situations. There's this great scene in the books it's also in the movies, but they meet the riders of Rohan. So it's Legolas and Aragorn and Gimli. They're roaming around. They're trying to find Merry and Pippin, right?
Yeah.
And they come upon the riders of Rohan. Now, in the movies, Aragorn goes, "Riders of Rohan, what news from the Rittermark?" And that's pretty cool. But in the books, when the riders encircle them and kind of start interrogating them, basically Aragorn just kind of puffs out his chest. He's like, "Listen, the three of us are on an errand. We don't have time to tell you about everything. He says, but you have two choices. One choice is you can assist us and take us on good faith and give us some of that Rohan hospitality, give us a few horses, let's go on our way. Or you can seek to enforce your law and attack us. And he says, if you decide on the latter, basically you're going to be left with half of your men. And you'll take us out, but we're going to basically rid you of basically half of what you've got. It was his way of saying, if you fuck with us, you help yourself. But we're going to take out the three of us are going to abolish about half of you. And remember from that scene, there's like 50 riders there, dude. I just love it. You could tell he was annoyed in the way that. In the books, remember, they describe him as this character who's like over 100 years. He's an old man, but he ages differently. He shows the kind of annoyance in the books that is true of somebody who's not only nobility, but has been around the block. I don't have time for you little middle school horse riders going around. I've been patrolling Middle Earth. I know so much more. I know your grandpa. Okay? Please leave me alone. I love that shit. And then a couple other things, like I mentioned, Tom Bombadil, when he comes across the ring, he doesn't think anything. It's just this little trinket, I think he calls it. And then Faramir is not really tempted by the ring. And I remember the behind the scenes documentaries, they talked about, why didn't they show Faramir and Tom Bombadil like not being enticed by the ring? And they said, listen, we've built so much up, so much tension and suspense and expectations around this ring and what it does and how it corrupts anybody. And if we give it to a character and they don't care, it just totally takes away. And I understood that in the context of a movie, like you've got to sustain that tension in the ways.
The ring was a more important character to the movie than Faramir was.
It was a character, and you've got to make sure that ring always seems threatening. So those are a couple instances of it, but all in all, I think the movies did a great job. And there's just different media. I mean, I think the books allow for a lot of different branches to go out. So
So I didn't mention this from the get-go, but I'm actually in a different location right now. I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Broken Arrow, thriving metropolis. Yeah. And my parents' house. It's Thanksgiving when we're recording this, and here with the family. And I apologize for any sounds you may have heard: dogs barking, nephews running around outside. Also been yawning a lot because I just ate like a ton of pizza, and I can feel my body shutting down.
Are you going to fall asleep during our podcast, Joel?
Precious.
Hey, just real quick, just as a quick teacher, I have to mention this. I've been going to bed earlier recently. So the other night, I go have dinner with one of my roommates, and we decide we're going to watch we watched an old Kurosawa movie called Throne of Blood, right?
Okay.
From like the 50s, black and white. And
I don't even know what that means, but I'm with you. Okay.
Yeah, we started the movie at I think it was like 7:30, and around like 8 o'clock, I had started falling asleep and basically slept through the whole movie. Like that happens with me usually around 11 o'clock. If I'm watching a movie around 11 o'clock, I couldn't believe that I fell asleep. Anyway, these are things that remind you that life is happening.
Ages on us.
Oh,
so.
Man.
I kind of want to wrap this conversation up with this idea. I see books, when people say these are my favorite books, they almost become this projection, like it's a biographical commentary on what someone like resonates with, how they see themselves, how they envision the things that move them. So why do you think that these books speak to you in this particular way? What about them, not only as a younger Trent, but the through line as you got older and they continued to resonate with you, even beyond, I would say, the dressing of the elegance, the dressing of the literature.
Yeah.
I would say there's something in those stories that have stuck with you. What do you think? What's the autobiographical component, Trent, for you?
It's a really good question. Part of it is I read those from a young age, and they made such an impression on me, and they've just traveled with me. And they have that nostalgia quality, right? They meant so much to me at a certain point in time, and if I go back, I can recapture some of that magic from childhood. I think there's some of that going on. Also, you'll remember in the movie where they're in the mines of Moria, and Gandalf is sitting there talking with Frodo, and Frodo says, "I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish
Yeah.
none of this had ever happened." And Gandalf says,
So do all who
he says,
live
"So
to
do
see
all who
such
live to see
times.
such times, but that is not
Yep.
for them to decide. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that's given you." I mean, that is so powerful. And for me, Joel, it's because I think so many things, and this is probably true for a lot of people, but life did not go the way that I had sketched it out or would have
Yep.
sketched it out, if I could have sketched it out when I was 0 years old. I resonate with Frodo when he says, "I wish none of this had ever happened to me." But then the challenge is, okay, Gandalf says, what are you going to do? Nobody wants these challenges to come, but what are you going to do at the time that's given you? Seeing then the persistence of the company, the persistence of Frodo to just keep going. This is what's happened to me. I've been given the ring. It came to me, and I'm going to do my part. I just find that enormously powerful. It's something I keep coming back to in my life, is this story that my experience is X. I wanted maybe Y or Z, and I didn't get Y or Z. And so what am I going to do to keep going, I think, is the thing to do. And so that the book has helped me with that. And I think that I think that's the biggest part of why the story has been so meaningful for me. And it is an embodiment of there's so many great values. I know now maybe I'm sounding kind of sentimental, but there's just so many goddamn great values in that story: friendship, heroism, perseverance, unlikely heroes, the humility of powerful people, knowing when the right time to demonstrate your power. There's just so many great values. They're not thrown in your face, but they're there, and they're there to. Yeah, there's so much wisdom in the book too. Anyway, yeah, I think that answers your question.
Yeah, wisdom is the word, and also like human. There's
Mm,
no plastic characters. There's
no.
no characters who don't make mistakes, and there's no characters who don't have redeeming qualities. I think about when I look at the movies and what I know of the books, I can see myself as Frodo, and this feeling of being compelled to leave the Shire to fight for something that I believe in, because I know
Yes.
to avoid that conflict is to avoid responsibility, to do my part to protect things that I love or care about. Or I could even see like a Gollum character where you begin to like see the Smeagol come out, and what you begin to distinguish the ring has done, and how Golem has like shifted because of the influence of the ring. And I can begin to see myself as like St. Paul would talk about in Romans. I don't do what I want to do. I begin to see myself in those characters. Even in the movies where Aragorn's hesitant to step into his birthright, and I've seen that myself as I've sometimes tried to live small because I'm afraid of the risk of like stepping into what I could potentially be. So for me, Trent, my question to you is, where do you see yourself in these novels?
Well, yeah, maybe some of this is wishful thinking too, but I would say I think Frodo would be in some ways a projection of me, in the sense that not wanting things to have happened, but carrying on anyway. And even, Frodo has many moments of cynicism, right? And Sam has to like pick him up, and others have to pick him up and stuff. But he doesn't want to go, but he's got other values that matter to him. He cares about the world that he lives in, and he cares about doing the right thing. So I resonate with that. And then I would also say Faramir in the sense that he's like, I would prefer to be doing other things, right? I would prefer to be playing music and back in Gondor, with the crew and all this kind of thing. And here I am out in the middle of nowhere. I'm in Ithilien. I'm in freaking Minas Morgul, where I'm just out doing shit, and I've got this insane father and this warmongering brother and all this kind of stuff. Whatever. Yeah. I'm not saying that's not autobiographical for me, but it is in the sense that I think that Faramir is somebody who maybe would be he preferred to be doing other things, but he has other values that matter. And the big question, Joel, is like, I mean, this is the big question I would ask to people watching is, where is the line drawn in your life where if you go past that line, you're not yourself anymore? You've become some other self that's been chosen by the culture you're a part of or your extended family or whatever. What is you? And what are the things that if you start letting go of those things, you're not you anymore? And answering that question might take a lifetime for people, but then the part of that question is sort of like, what are you willing to suffer to stay yourself? And I don't know that we ask that question in our culture. I don't think we care. We care about making money and getting wealthy. We don't care about what would it mean to be your authentic self, and what are you willing to suffer in order to do that? And I think what our culture tells us is that who cares about that? Just go out and make money and be successful, and that's good. And I think a lot of people are lost and vacuous as a result. And I'm not saying I do that thing perfectly. I'm trying to do that, and it's hard, man. It's hard. It's hard to do it. You face your own sense of cowardice and these kinds of things, and then you do suffer because of choices that you make, and you're like, I wish maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I shouldn't have been honest with I shouldn't have honestly shared what I think about politics or religion or my point of view on this thing, or you start wondering whether or not it was good to be your authentic self. But I'm always in favor of trying to be your authentic self, even if it entails discomfort and suffering.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, and it's probably a paraphrase that's more akin to the internet than to the actual Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. It goes something like this: and now with God's help, I shall become myself.
Yeah.
And I see from what you're kind of talking about from the hobbits and the Shire, what the line is, if I stay behind on this side of the line, what am I losing of myself by not venturing out? And then on the other people, other like cultures is like by following the messages and sometimes the messages are they sound like messages of honor. They sound like messages of like commitment, but they're really just the veneer of the culture's like ego. And like we see in today's culture, to be successful is the veneer of just being like an insecure, ego-driven, driven by fear and insecurity, so that I can prove myself to whoever it may be, and it's called success. And it's like, no, none of you are being successful. You're all just like swimming in a school of fish toward an open mouth of a shark. And
yeah. Totally. Hello?
Hi. I don't know. I thought you might say something, and you didn't.
What was it? Did you ask a question? I missed it because I started talking.
I didn't ask a question.
Oh.
I just awkwardly left it in your lap.
No, I appreciate that. No. Yeah, Joel, I think that's exactly right.
For those watching on those listening, I also stood still, so it looked like maybe I froze.
I thought maybe the screen froze. That was quite a little. That was wizardry. There was a certain wizardry to that. Yeah.
I think that's a good place to wrap this up, man. Trent, thank you so much for your expertise, your passion, and your bald-headedness.
Hey, yes, all of those are intentional, including the bald.
Yeah, for everyone out there, thank you for joining us for this second installment of Favorite Books, The Lord of the Rings, which I learned today, 0 years ago today, that is actually one novel and not three, actually 6 books. Thank you for schooling me and making me look stupid on a podcast, Trent. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this Lead Balloons conversation, the alchemy of unpopular opinions.